this is Nancy Ralsma with Quilting with Nancy. Thank you very much for joining me on my channel as we are working our way through the Four Crossings quilt. So the pieced version is behind me. Let me show you real quick the applique version. Both quilts, instructions, and patterns are in the book. The only difference being the center square and the outside appliqued pieces. So as you saw that when you saw the bigger flowers going around the outside, and the pieced version has the square and a square blocks, and I just showed you two different ways to do that. So what we're going to work on today in our second to last video, there will be a final video where I'll show you how I'm doing the quilting on it, but this will be the last one for the instructions on the quilt top. What we'll be doing today is setting the square and a square blocks in the pieced border. So here we will have setting triangles, we'll have the corner triangles. Then we also, at the same time, we can be talking about this piece border because it really is the same exact thing. Oh, there, I guess it's easier to see it here, kind of high at the back. So this is the other piece border. A little word of not caution or warning, or the idea of piecing a border to be put onto a quilt is not something that beginners should probably maybe jump right into. All right. Now, I know there's beginners out there that are always jumping into the hardest quilts they can find and doing a great job. And that is awesome. I mean, how could I possibly not like that idea? But keep in mind, anytime you're putting a pieced border onto a pieced quilt, you have to deal with the size of the piece border. How are you going to adjust it? Let's say the center of your quilt turned out a little bit smaller than planned, but then the piece border ended up being out the size that it was supposed to be. How are you going to deal with that? There's a couple of different ways to do it that honestly would be really too big for me to do on a video. But one of them is adding an additional border. So let's say you get your center done and you get your outside border done, and your outside piece border is a little larger than it needs to be onto the quilt. What you can do is actually add an additional border between the pieced body of the quilt and the pieced border, and that will work. And what I'll do is I'll always like maybe add 2 inches and then trim it down and then see what size I need it to be. It takes a little bit of a trial and error, but it is a doable option. The opposite is true if what your pieced border is too small or too large. Not the opposite is true. I guess the other option is that you can adjust the seams on the pieced border. So on this quilt, it would be adjusting these diagonal seams. That maybe if it's a little bit too big, you just go back and take a little bit more extra on each seam. Maybe you can gain an inch there, depending on how many blocks there are, and on the top border too. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to show you how to construct these and cut these and trim these, but I just want you to know that that is something that you've got to think about. You've got to consider when you're making a pieced border onto a pieced quilt. So this is the book. This is the Four Crossings book, and we are working our way through. This is, and it is it's going to be like a 65, 70 page book when it's all done. Here we piece the setting triangles, and here is the instructions for making the setting triangles and the corner triangles. And this is the idea. Oops, I've got this is my center square for my TARDIS quilt done. Here are the crossing blocks where I actually have some TARDIS fabric where the TARDIS is flying, and this is what we're going to work on now. So we need to take the fabric that is to be our setting triangles and trim it down. So let's center this up. There we go. All right. So I'm just going to do a couple of them at a time. When I'm doing setting triangles, and this is not a directional one, but if it was, it'd be a little bit trickier, but this one's not. But let's pretend it is. Let's say that this is the fabric for my setting triangles, and it's a directional. Let's imagine it's got a stripe, and I've done this other times too. So now you're going to take, and I want to stack them so that they're all right sides up. Oh, and I, of course, have taken this fabric and spray sized it so it's a little bit stiff. You can tell even when I'm moving it this way. All right. So now you're going to take and cut on the diagonal like this, slow and steady. Then move your fabric around. Keep the two of the pieces together as you go for the other angle. And this is how all setting triangles are cut. But let's imagine it's directional. So if it is directional, at this point you want to label them. So this one would be the one that you would use on the top row of the quilt. Let's say that the direction is a stripe. This is the one that would be the right-hand side of the quilt, this being the bottom, and this being the left-hand side. So if you're using a directional quilt, keep those little tricks in mind. I am not, so I'm just going to stack these all up. And since they're spray sized, I can just kind of tap them all into place. Then I'm going to do the same thing with, actually I don't need to do it on this one because you can see it's all the same. But here is going to be the bottom. So if we are looking at the quilt, this is the light one in the particular coloring that I'm doing. Of course, you could do any coloring you want. And then this is the moon and the stars because in my crossing blocks, this is also my moon and star fabric. So I kind of like the idea of these two touching. I like the secondary design that it creates with this going up and then down and then back up again. So that is totally up to you. All right. So you would cut these also. Then we get to the corner squares. Corner squares are typically smaller than the setting squares. There is math. The math involved, it's going to tell you what you wanted to set them at in the book, but there is math involved, and you can get the free, on my website, I have a free chart for setting triangles and squares with all of the math, but all the chart going. If you have an 8-inch finished block, then you want to cut your setting squares, blah, 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 and you want to cut your corner squares, blah, blah, blah. Because the math is something like the finished size of the quilt times 1.414 divided by 2 and then add 1 1/4, something like that. So instead, just go onto the website. Under free stuff, you'll find that little chart so you'd be able to have it. Now in the book, of course, I've got you the sizes for what you need for the quilt. So corner triangles, if they are not directional, you can cut them both at the same time. If we were to imagine this was a directional fabric, I would cut one of them from the top left to the bottom right, and one of them from the bottom left to the top right. So then, see how they're split that way? So then this would be the top right corner of my quilt. This would be the top left corner of the quilt. This would be the bottom right corner. This would be the top right corner, and this would be the bottom left corner. If this was directional, it is not, so I'm just going to put them together. Now it does occur to me that maybe you don't even know why you have to cut these differently for setting triangles and corner triangles. So keep in mind with a setting triangle, those are the ones cut from the larger square. This is the straight of grain going around a square. This is where the weave of the fabric is going to be at its strongest, straight of grain. So when you cut it on the diagonal twice so that you end up with this triangle, that means that these two edges are bias cut. You always want to make the bias cut edges be on the inside of the quilt. When we did the corner triangles, they were like this. Again, straight of grain here. Cutting it just one time makes just one edge be the bias cut. And these are the square, the straight grain from the block. And so I'll show you how those fit into the quilt and why you need one and the other to make your borders actually stable. All right, so let's scooch these out of the way. And we're going to take a couple of our setting triangles. So I'm going to get rid of this mat now. Put that over there. All right, so here's a couple of our setting triangles. I really do like this one because it's actually got the TARDIS spinning around, and that's kind of cool. All right, and I'm going to just do like a mini version of this and then show you the real one. The idea is your setting triangles will be up here. All right, so let's do it with 3 blocks. 3 blocks will help make a little bit more sense. Here's my 3rd block. All right, so the setting triangles are going to be on the top and on the bottom. So here is setting triangles. All right. The corner triangles on the borders itself, if I scooch it this way, are going to be here because we're creating a border, and this long strip, kind of, I don't know if you'd imagine it's a table runner or something like that, needs to have the straight of the grain at the top, the sides, and the bottom. So here, I'm going to take and put one of the corner triangles of the dark fabric and then one of the light triangles. Now, if you're, depending on what part you're doing in the borders, because I tell you exactly how many to make of each, like this one has 2 light corner triangles and 1 light setting triangle. This one has a light corner triangle, a dark corner triangle, and then a large setting triangle. So you're going to do what it says here and then make 20 of these. And the reason that is the border itself. Here, the side border going from here on down, this has to have corner triangles inside here. And then the border going to the top and the bottom, that has setting triangles here and here. So that's why there are 2 different kinds. This border's setting triangles and corner triangles has a dark on the inside. The top and bottom border do not. They have both a light on the outside. So just follow what it says in the book for how many of those that you need. All right. So this is what the piecing is going to be like. For this block that is going to end up with 3 triangles around it, the idea is you're going to take this piece, flip it over, and match the square of the triangle with the square of the block below. So when you do that, you're going to have this part sticking out about a 1/2 inch or so. I always make mine a little bigger than they need to be. And then I'm going to pin it. So I will go, hey, that's the edge that I need to sew on. If I don't pin it, chances are I'll start sewing this edge and then it's wrong. So putting a pin there will keep yourself straight. Then I'm going to move that out of the way. This one, I'm going to fold in half. Find my center. I don't have a pair of scissors, so I'm just going to take a little nip with this ginormous rotary cutter. Now I know where the center is. Now I'm going to match that to the block. And again, I'm going to pin it so I remember where it belongs. In this case, I actually like to do 2 pins because this is a bias edge and I just want to be careful. I cannot add this third one until these 2 both have been sewn on. So now this, same idea, but this can get a little tricky. Here we have the top setting triangle and the bottom setting triangle. The top one flips over, again, matching up the square of the block with the square of the triangle, and don't forget to put a pin in there, otherwise you might accidentally sew on the wrong side. And then this one is actually going in opposite corners. So this is matching up this corner, the bottom one is matching up this corner. The error most commonly made is people do something like this, where they're both matching up on the side, the corners that are together, but instead it is you're matching the left-hand corner of the block and the right-hand corner of the block. So it's follow the book, because this is the part that students typically will error piecing it one way and then the other. So then I'll take this, crease him out of the way, and match this one up to his left-hand corner, and putting in my pins so that I don't accidentally go the wrong way. All right, and then I would continue that. So I'm going to do one more here. Actually, I'll use this one with my bottoms and my top squares. All right, so here we go again, matching the right-hand corner of the square. And if I had this fabric was directional, I would be being cautious what border I was working it on, the top, the bottom, or whatever. But we do not have a directional fabric this time. All right. There. So these are ready to go to the sewing machine. And I want to show you that I technically would do the exact same thing on the tiny border with the setting squares going all the way around the quilt. Same exact idea. Corner triangles here, setting triangles here. They're going to look the same way, where it matched up the right-hand corner and the left-hand corner, and then I'll show you how that actually goes together. So this is like 2 borders in one that you're getting the instructions for. So at this point, I'm going to go to my sewing machine and show you how this all pieces together. So at my sewing machine, I have my leader in place, and I have moved my needle over so that from my guidelines to my needle is my scant 1/4 inch. And I did do that test again just to make sure that I was getting closer to a really good one. All right. So here I'm going to sew on this seam. Since this is a bias edge, my preference is to sew with that on the bottom. So I'm going to flip it over. So now a couple of things that have happened. One, I've got the bias edge underneath so that my feed dogs will help feed it properly. Two, I'm able to see the intersection on this block to make sure I don't go too far to the left. And three, now the point is at the bottom. Instead of if I flip it the other way, I'm starting to sew on the point, and that can be a little bit problematic depending on your machine. So flipping it over so that the triangle is on the bottom is what I would recommend. Okay. It's just going to glide right over. I can take my pins out if I want to. Then I'll pick up my next one. Same thing. Going to keep the triangle at the bottom. Lining that up properly. Get that to line up. I didn't cut that little guy off on my square. And here I'm watching it because that seam looks a little narrow, so I'm going to try and aim toward the X, maybe go to a little bit of a narrow seam allowance so that I don't cut off that point of the square and a square, and this one's the same way. And I think that these are the ones that I did with the traditional piecing. I did not do the paper piecing, and those are the ones that it's most likely going to happen to. So here again, I'm going to aim to the X, maybe even a smidge to the right of the X, right about here. Then I'm going to go back out to my seam allowance. Okay. Now twisting it around and coming from the other side, because I remember I did do 2 on each blocks, and I can spin that around back this way. Okay. So my presser foot lifts up automatically on my FAF sewing machine. So now I'm ready to sew my other one, and look, this is where my pin is, so I know this is the seam I need to sew. So I'm going to flip it around, match up the corners, match up the straight lines, and then you've got the bias on the bottom. Line that up, look at the square. How am I doing on the square? Am I going to... Yep, there, I did not clip it off. That's a good thing. All right, couple more, and then I'm going to go to the ironing board. Now, this is the corner triangle. So this one is a little bit different, where he's got a point on the top and on the bottom. I am still going to flip him over. As it's taking it in at the point, just be cautious of it so that your machine doesn't accidentally take it down under. Going straight across. And then I believe I have one more. I'm going to press these, and then I'll meet you back at the other table. So now I'm back from doing the sewing, and I've done a little bit of the pressing. And let me show you how it's actually all turned out. So here we have the blocks, and I've pressed them to the point of least resistance. And I mention that because we can't always do that. So just kind of keep that in mind. Oops, I better flip that around. So it goes this way with the light on top, dark on the bottom. This one, light on top, dark on the bottom. And then this is the one that will be a corner. And I will take and I will add one of those. Here, let's go this way. There. I will add this to it. So this will be the corner of my border. But this is the part I want to talk to you about next. Once you get these segments sewn like that, it's the putting them together. You saw even when I brought this one in, it can get kind of confusing. I'm just stating fact, right? The idea is you get here and you're like, how do these line up? Think about the seams between here at the right-hand side and the left-hand side of the block. The idea is they go together so that it makes a straight line. There's times that you're going to get confused and think about different ways of putting it together. Just make it so that the center line here matches up. Then you will flip that over, and since one is pressed to one way and one is to the other, you can crash those seams right together, put a pin in there, and then sew this seam going all the way across. Once you've got that done, your border should look like this. Oops, let me flip it over so we got the light on the top. So we have the light on the top, we've got our setting triangles at the bottom, and the two side borders actually are made of just 6 of the squares like this. Want to show you the pressing on it though. The pressing on the back, I love pressing when it actually works out perfectly. And in this case, there's just no safe, there's no easy, there's no, oh, you always have to do it this way plan. So here, if I had pressed all these seams to one side, this intersection, and this intersection would be quite bulky. And I just don't prefer that. For me, I find the better option is to press this seam to the point of least resistance to the triangle. And then right here, I just kind of flip the seam over. All right. So I don't cut the seam. I don't trim the seam. I just kind of am crisscrossing it there because seam separating here will not work. You'll end up with lots more bulky seams, surprisingly. But here, I'm just going to go straight up so that my seam will be flatter when it comes time. And I go to the front side and I see that everything is intersecting here and here. Once you get your borders constructed, let's move these all out of the way so we got lots of space. The next thing is to trim them down. Now, I would not trim the two sides. I would leave that extra until I knew how the border was going to fit onto the pieced quilt. So don't trim these sides because I would, typically you'd want that to be the 1/4 of an inch past that square, but don't do it. Just hold off on doing that a little bit until you see how it fits. But you do need to trim the width of the border, and this needs to be trimmed to 8 inches. So let me start on this side. And this is how I would do it. I do have an 8.5 inch ruler. And the idea is I'm always going to analyze the block before I start cutting into things, right? So if I analyze this block and if I set the dark points at the 1/4 of an inch from the edge, so from this dark point up to the top, and then I look all the way down here, and you're not going to be able to see it because it is kind of dark. I want to make sure that the same thing is true here, that this dark point is a 1/4 of an inch from the edge, or a little bit more even would be okay. So here, and I can see down here that it is, and I'm going to have a little bit extra to trim at the bottom. So I'm going to line up and cut this slow and steady, slow, 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 slow. And I would continue all the way down on that. Then flip it over, and now I can measure it right at 8 inches. You can't see it again, but I can see that I do have a 1/4 of an inch on that bottom point. And again, the trick to doing this is slow and steady, maybe even stopping, moving your hand, then continue. Sometimes working on a lower cutting surface will help with the accuracy of that too. So now with that trimmed, I have my 8 inch border that would go all the way around the pieced portion of my quilt. So looking at it here, these are the crossing blocks that we made earlier, the square and the squares. Here the corners are the sides. These are the shorter of the two pieced borders, and then the two long ones go at the top. And then the same thing true with the sides here, with the smaller setting squares. And again, I love this kind of secondary design that's created. So here it's at the big squares, then here it's at the small squares. So that's why I designed it the way that I did, because I liked it and it's my design, so I can do whatever I want. Now it's your choice. Now you get to design the quilt that you want, either using pieces and parts of the book or following along as in the book it is. I do want to show you just a couple of pictures. So this is my full applique book. You can see those secondary designs created. I used a Sue Pen fabric for the leaf setting triangles. This is my full pieced quilt. This one I used a Jason Yenter fabric, and this was back from 2022. So this was his Haitian fabric, something like that. This is another one that I did. And I'm loving this, and I would love to be able to find the fabric to make this. I just thought it looked kind of Americana. using the red, white, and blue and the printed blocks. The one that I'm doing now is what I'm calling my TARDIS quilt, and that's got the blue and yellow. So in the book, there are the coloring sheets. If you are an electric quilt enthusiast, so you design your own quilts on EQ8, let me know. We do have a membership, and with the membership, you can join me once a month to learn a little bit more every month about designing on electric quilt. And when you are a member, the addict level member, then I could actually send you the program and you could do your own coloring. So I hope you enjoyed this series. I did the recordings a little bit differently than we've done other recordings so that I could actually do it myself. I hope you appreciate all the hard work that goes into this, because it's an awful lot of planning to get this done. And then I get Athena to do the editing and Teresa to make the front and look fancy and Gina to be working on the book with me and stuff. So we are a team. Thank you very much for joining me. If you have any questions, quiltingwithnancy@gmail.com. Products are listed below. My website is www.quiltingwithnancy.com. Have a great day.